After years of issues in the production, we finally have the first episode of the Halo TV show. Y familia, I am here to break down every single detail and give you my honest opinions on everything that we saw in episode 1. We gotta start it off with the question on everybody's mind. How does this TV show change the canon from the video games? And the answer to said question is a lot. The TV show takes place before the fall of Reach, which means that the Spartan team that we should be interacting with is Blue Team at this point in the timeline. Pero papi, I'm sad to announce that Blue Team does not exist. In this case, they rebranded like a Pokemon game and called it Team Silver, which in this case is comprised of 4 distinct Spartan 2s, Riz, Kai, Vanek, and obviously Master Chief. It may seem complicated on the surface, but I'm gonna call it like it is en Arroyo Habichuela. This series is what is called the Silver Timeline, which is completely detached from the mainline games, books, and anything involving the official canon. So, to be clear, this TV series is not exactly canon to the Halo timeline per se. This project functions as an alternate timeline of sorts, where the creators of the show are able to mix and match concepts, appearances, and story elements from the games, the books, and the comics in any way that they see fit. Okay, eso fue un montón, but now that you know the premise, let's talk about what we saw in the first episode. The majority of this episode is set in the outer colonies in a planet called Madrigal, which is essentially being stripped of its resources, primarily heavy oxygen, by the USNC. Our main character outside of Master Chief is known Kwan Ah, which is the daughter of a general that's leading the major settlement that has taken home in Madrigal. Their motives are simple and understandable. They basically just want independence from the UNSC. One of the things that this show explores that we haven't really seen in the mainline games is that the Spartan program is not seen as the heroes here. Kwan and the rest of the insurrectionists basically see the Spartan program as a tool for the restrictive UNSC empire to just extract minerals and resources from any planet that they can conquer. Before the Covenant leads their attack in this first episode, they were the main villain of their story. After this, the story gets pretty predictable. As soon as the Spartans arrive on the scene, homie, the Covenant is basically sushi. But they made their entrance a little bit too late because the Covenant basically took the insurrectionists and destroyed them. Again, another change from the mainline games. The violence, the gore, and all of the brutality of war is shown in clear depiction here. Arms, legs, limbs, everything that is shot by a plasma caster is flying off. And this is one of the main points I wanted to make. The main point of appeal that I saw in this first episode is that we're getting a boots on the ground approach at the brutality and the cost of war on both sides, both the Covenant and the UNSC. In a war like this, there are heavy casualties on both sides, and that is represented perfectly. Moving on from that, homie, this is a Halo story, so let's talk about Master Chief. His story essentially begins as soon as he touches an ancient Forerunner artifact in one of the caves in Madrigal. We already know from the games that humanity is meant to be the Reclaimers. They are supposed to take on the mantle of responsibility, which makes sure that the most advanced life forms in this galaxy take care of the less evolved ones. So of course, all of the Forerunner technology, which was human-based, is going to be activated by human hosts. Touching this alien artifact basically gave Master Chief access to the memories that were sectioned off by Halsey during the creation of the Spartan 2 program. We get a really wild scene where he remembers his family, his mom, his father, and even his dog. If you couldn't tell, that is a major problem for the head UNSC scientist Catherine Halsey, who you may know as the creator of the Cortana system and the Spartan 2 program, which portrayed perfectly by Natasha McElhone. Once we get to Reach, we do get to see some familiar faces, mainly the family trio of Catherine Halsey, Miranda, and Jacob Keyes. We did get a small scene in the High Charity, but there's not much to talk about here. We basically just see Mercy, one of the leaders of the Covenant, who is talking to McKee, one of the human childs that has been raised by the Covenant force. I'm guessing that she's gonna be a key plot point in the future because only humans can access Forerunner technology because the Forerunners, well, were human. We covered the story, let's talk about the sound design. During the opening battle, you get a ton of familiar Halo sound effects. All of the weapons, the aliens, it all just had a brutal feeling of nostalgia. By now you know that I love me some Easter eggs. And in the case of the sound design, one of the niche ones was one of the Covenant elites, which basically goes into camo mode, and it has the original sound effect from Halo 1 Combat Evolved. Of course, the most iconic part when it comes to sound is the original Halo theme, which shows up in the intro, which is well done, and then at the end. However, the rest of the music in the episode was just bland. It was meh, which is really unfortunate because this is a franchise that is known for its particularly exceptional sound design and music choices. For example, Halo Infinite is the newest installment in the series, and the soundtrack was straight up banging. So I'm gonna have to give the sound like a 6 or a 7 out of 10 at most. When it comes to the graphics and the CGI, that's where I have my biggest gripe with this episode, which is important because you have to keep in mind this show had a budget of over $90 million for the entire duration of the show, which means a roughly close to $10 million per episode, which is why I'm really surprised because the action and the CGI intertwined during those action set pieces doesn't look good at all. And you can notice it in the key moments like Master Chief jumping through vehicles, fighting the elites, or even throwing his rifle on the floor. The CGI is just, it looks like something out of the early 2000s. Granted, it's not pixelated, it does hold up, but the reality is that it's not polished, and it's not something that we could have gotten from a Halo project in 2022. We've already seen what fan-made projects and Forward Unto Dawn could bring to the table, why are we supposed to expect less from something as big as a Paramount Plus series? Another thing that I wanted to mention is the inconsistent and just weird design choices that they had for the Covenant. The structure and overall look for the aliens is fine, especially during the close-ups, but the armor doesn't complement them or fit them at all like it did during the games. They look like something you would see in the early seasons of Star Trek. One of the easiest examples to point to are the Royal Guards at the High Charity, which are meant to be protecting Mercy. In the games, they basically have a gold and red armor that makes them look super tough and menacing, and here they just have the same armor of the elites at the beginning and just a spear. I feel like a little bit more attention to detail would have gone a long way in this endeavor. You could give different classes of Covenant warriors different armor styles and make them stand out, to look fierce. Aside from those gripes that I have with the CGI designs, everything else looks in tip-top shape, including the sets and the costumes. Speaking of the costumes, it's time to talk about the Spartans. Holy damn, Silver Team looks and sounds the part. All of the Silver Team members look like they were plucked straight out of the game. They're imposing, they have gravitas, and the armor just looks sick. Pablo Schreiber does an amazing job as Master Chief as well. The easiest thing that I could compare him to is the Mandalorian, because he has a lot of the same mannerisms and behavioral structure as Din Djarin does in that show. I am glad to announce that he is a man of few words and he is a badass both in the game and in the show. The main issue that everybody in the internet seems to have is obviously the fact that they show his face. Master Chief in the game is meant to be an avatar for the player where you see yourself embarking in this adventure. This is why for the majority of the franchise's run, we don't even know what John looks like. We've gotten teases here and there, but we've never seen his full face. But in this case, they're going for a more humanized and personal version of John 117. He's getting a distinct character arc, especially with the plot point that as soon as he touched the Forerunner technology, he gets an inside look at his previous life, which was basically stolen from him. Remember, Catherine Halsey created a program that basically abducted children and made them into super soldiers. Again, one of the cool things about the Halo franchise is the fact that its main character, Master Chief, is kind of an enigmatic hero. You don't really know him in depth. He will put his life on the line every time that he is needed to save humanity, but you just have a certain era of mystery towards him. They're clearly going for a different take. They're trying to flesh out Master Chief emotionally, and the easiest way to do so is for him to take his helmet off. It is understandable and well done in this case based on how he does it and when he does it, but it's just, it's really hard to look over. It's not that I completely disagree with it, it's just that I think it was too early to pull that card. I definitely understand that they wanted to take the Mandalorian route and show his face for an emotional appeal, but you could have done that later in the season. Doing that in the first episode, no bueno. The last thing that I wanted to talk about is pacing. Like some of the reviews that I was seeing on the internet, I was actually a big fan of the opening and the closing scenes. The Covenant elites are a legitimate threat and they are a force to be reckoned with. Having said all of that, one of the things that really irks me about this episode is the fact that the beginning and the closing of the episodes are pretty strong, but the middle just falls apart really quickly. We go from an intense, emotional, gripping scene at the beginning in Madrigal, and then they follow it up with a short and slow-paced scene where Catherine Halsey essentially meets all of the high command at UNSC. I'm not even gonna count the High Charity scene because it's literally less than 3-4 minutes. Thankfully, the opening and the closing of the episode kept me hooked, so I will be watching the next episodes to give you guys these reviews. Overall, I know there's gonna be some pushback on this series primarily because of the reviews and the early screenings of the show. Keep in mind, this show was supposed to come out roughly 7 years ago, and due to all the creative changes, and now we got this final product that nobody seems to enjoy. Over the past couple of days, we've seen a lot of reviews basically saying that this is going to go into the huge heap of failed video game adaptations because this is such a large departure from the mainline games. The main thing that I'm afraid of stemming from that criticism is the fact that we saw a lot of reviews from the people that got press copies of the TV show and saying that episode 2 is where everything starts to fall off hard. I mean, it makes sense. I'm already questioning the creative decisions in the first episode. I'm just gonna take it step by step and I'm not gonna cast judgments thus far. On my end, Papo, I have learned my lesson. You have to watch everything to get a clear vision of what they were going for, and then you cast your stone. If I had to give this episode a rating, I think I have to go around 6.8 to like a 7.3 out of 10, and it only varies because there are some moments of really brilliant storytelling and then just ass CGI and clear departures from the source material. But if there's this much conflict and controversy within the fan base because of the bad CGI, the horrible story decisions, or the departures from the mainline games, it's all gonna come crashing down at some point. I just hope that it lands on its feet. But then again, that is all that you're gonna get from me. That was episode 1. Make sure to drop a follow, like this video, share it with your friends, and make sure to hit that notification bell so you can get instant notice for whenever I post my review of the second episode. Until then, I'll see you on the next one. Blah!